I have never been inclined to engage in card games. During my tenure at the university, a few of my acquaintances attempted to instruct me in the nuances of poker. However, I was unable to grasp the fundamentals and, consequently, did not pursue further learning. I was similarly uninterested in the intricacies of poker strategy, such as the relative merits of different hands or the nuances of Texas Hold'em. I ceased playing altogether, having expended funds on my more unscrupulous acquaintances. My wife, Kathy, was, however, an avid poker player and demonstrated remarkable proficiency. She participated in several local tournaments, achieving commendable results. However, she typically engaged in games with a regular group of friends. This group convened once or twice a month at the residence of Kathy's. The group included Larry and Sandy, who lived in a townhouse in the suburbs. I should note that Sandy was Larry's roommate and that Kathy, Paul, Brian, Terry, and Mark were also present, although they were not playing poker. My own participation was not required on this occasion. My wife, Mary, and Brian's wife, Allison, typically occupied the living room while we observed television programming. There was a gentleman named Wes who also participated in the games, but he was discovered to have engaged in cheating and subsequently removed from the group. I did not object to Katie's presence, but as previously stated, she was not my acquaintance. Mary and Allison were tolerable, and we were developing a proficiency in the game. The remaining individuals were merely tolerable, if that. I could not envision myself engaging with any of them on a voluntary basis. I did not inherently dislike these individuals, with the exception of Mark. Mark was a conceited individual, and I found him disagreeable. Terry and Mark were both experiencing feelings of loneliness. Terry was reserved and unassuming, and he was not particularly adept at poker. Mark, he was a disagreeable individual, and if I were to encounter him in a public setting, I would likely refrain from engaging with him. He was boisterous, disagreeable, and egocentric. I engaged in debate with him on numerous occasions and tolerated his presence solely because he was a member of my wife's poker group and we only interacted with him when they played poker. My primary issue with the poker night was that this resulted in Katie exhibiting a markedly competitive demeanor. If she lost, she would exhibit a noticeable decline in mood the following day. I advised her on multiple occasions that her approach was unduly serious, but she dismissed my counsel. She has recently been attempting to establish poker night as a weekly occurrence, but I was reluctant to devote that much time to the endeavor. Fortunately, Mary and Allison shared the same opinion, and thus, poker nights did not become a weekly occurrence. On a particular Saturday night, we were at Larry and Si's, where the regular band was performing. It was evidently an inauspicious night for Kat. On occasion, I would approach her to inquire if she desired a beverage, and she would respond affirmatively. She consistently exhibited a proclivity for anger. It was already quite late, past the time they typically ceased their activities. Upon entering the premises, I discerned a commotion emanating from the dining room, where the individuals in question were engaged in a game. As I approached, I heard Mark assert that it was a wager. Larry then followed with a remark, "You know the rules, Kat. If you do not fulfill the terms of this wager, you will be removed from the group." At this juncture, Katie interjected. "Very well, let us conclude this matter promptly. It is now my turn. What is the latest development, Katie?" She informed me that she had lost all of her money and thus was obliged to me for the final hand. Mark, with a smile and a look of triumph on his face, informed me that she had lost and that it was now time to pay. I must say that I am sorry for Katie, but she has made a bet and lost. These are the rules and I am bound by them. At that moment, Katie resolved to commence sealing her destiny. "It's okay, I lost. I have to pay," she said. "No, Katie. You must be faithful to me. What you want to do is pay a rate that will cheat me," Mark said. "It is important to note that this situation is not about you, Katie. We are leaving Henry. I am reluctantly doing this because I have no choice. If I do not do this, I will be removed from the situation. I am indifferent to the consequences for you, Katie. You may be removed from the situation, or you may never play poker again. I am heading towards her. I am going to need your help, Katie." You looked at Paul and Brian. She tilted her head in my direction as I proceeded to approach Katie. Paul and Brian then proceeded to grab me from behind. I began to resist, but Larry intervened and assisted them in restraining me. Larry then inquired, "Are you serious, idiots? Are you going to hold me while my wife does this in front of me?" The woman indicated that she did not wish to leave the premises, therefore she would be charged the standard rate. The man then laughed and stated that he did not believe that the man would remain there for long. He then advanced towards the woman, who was kneeling on the floor. He informed her that if she performed the requested action, they would conclude their business. He did not raise his voice, nor did he use any exclamation marks. He spoke in a calm and measured tone, using her full name. He advised her to cease her dramatics. "Henry," she said. She began to lean forward when she did this. I screamed very loudly, "Stop," for a second, and she stopped and looked at me. "I just want to be clear, is everyone okay with this?" Silence fell in the room. Then Mark shuffled forward again and said, "Come on. He's ruining the mood." Katie leaned forward and said, "Okay, that's enough. I am unable to observe the situation, therefore, I request to be released so that I may take my leave." I had formulated a preliminary plan of action which I assumed had been concluded between me and Katie. However, I felt the need to exact revenge on this individual. Katie allowed the end of his sentence to emerge from her mouth and nodded to the individuals holding me. They released me, and I proceeded to approach Katie in a calm manner. Subsequently, I feigned an attempt to remove my wedding ring. My left hand moved rapidly, while my right hand was twisted in an effort to dislodge the ring. Katie was positioned on her knees to my left, her countenance displaying a sense of resolve. Mark was standing to my right, his expression a grin. As I approached, I addressed Katie, saying, "I had previously informed you that should you proceed with this action, our relationship would be irrevocably terminated." I stood adjacent to them and observed Katie. The fingers of my left hand were extended, as though I were attempting to remove the ring. My right hand was clenched into a fist. Despite my explicit warning, "Catherine, you proceeded with this foolish action." In response, I struck Mark in the nose. With the back of my right fist, he immediately raised both hands to cover his face. I immediately turned to the right and punched both hands, resulting in my left fist making contact with his bloody face. His head fell back, causing him to lose his balance. Given that his jeans and boxers were around his ankles, he fell onto his buttocks and then onto his back. His back made contact with the floor between the dining table and a large antique cabinet. I was overcome with rage and continued to improvise. Katie fell to the ground in a seated position, and I found myself standing at Mark's feet, looking down at him. There was a dining table to my right and an antique wardrobe to my left. The table was quite large, approximately 8 feet in length. The cabinet was of considerable size, with 3 chairs on each side. It was of oak construction and approximately 6 feet in length, with a base of approximately 30 in height. The upper half of the cabinet was situated on the base and was approximately 40 in height. I grasped the upper portion of the antique cabinet. I was aware that I could not knock it over, but I might be able to frighten him severely. The base alone was estimated to weigh approximately 300 pounds, with all the contents inside. The upper half was a wooden frame with mirrored glass doors and was filled with decorative china, HL figurines, a few snow globes, and other items they had collected. For Mark, Larry was unable to affix the upper section to the lower one correctly. When I pulled on it, the upper section toppled over. My intention was not to pull the upper section on Mark. I found the way the pieces came together when the cabinet tipped over and landed intriguing. It sounded like an explosion, but fortunately for Mark, there wasn't enough force to cause significant damage. The stand and the table were not aligned, so the cabinet landed on the stand. The bottom part remained on the stand, while the top part landed on the dining table. Unfortunately for Mark, the items displayed in the antique cabinet slid forward and crashed through the glass doors of the cabinet, resulting in shards of glass. The glass doors were shattered, and glass fragments rained down on Mark. The contents of the closet also fell, shattering into pieces. Mark sustained numerous lacerations, and it is fortunate that he was able to cover his face with his hands to prevent the glass from entering his broken nose or eyes. When Mark fell on his back, his shirt rode up to his stomach. His jeans and boxers were pulled down to his ankles, exposing everything from his upper abdomen to the middle of his shins. He immediately began bleeding heavily. This incident occurred in a matter of seconds, and everyone present froze and looked on. With expressions of shock, I was in an improvisational state of mind. I feigned concern and proceeded to walk around the table where his head was, loudly instructing others to refrain from touching him and to call for an ambulance. Having reached his head, I bent down low enough for him to hear me, and said, "I hope you bleed, but if not, come back to me later. Furthermore, we will discuss the matter at hand." It is important to note that there is a considerable amount of glass in the vicinity. If I were in your position, I would refrain from moving about so much. Sandy emerged from the kitchen, uttering the words, "The ambulance is on the way. The estimated time of arrival is 5 minutes. Perhaps you should call the police." Katie and I responded simultaneously. She declined, and I concurred. Katie was not lacking in intelligence. She was aware that should the police officer arrive, a report would be filed and statements taken. Larry was enraged, stating, "You attempted to kill him and destroyed my closet. We must contact the authorities." While I did not actually intend to kill him, I concurred that the police should be informed. I would be willing to speak with the police to clarify the situation. It would be helpful to have the officers hold me down while my wife has sex with another man. It seems that she lost a bet and is now seeking compensation. I am unsure if this is accurate, but I will conduct further research. It is unlikely that the police will believe this account. Who do you think they will believe, Larry? It is possible that I am mistaken, but I believe that I am correct. You are free to make your own decision. I would advise you to call the police. I will go outside and wait for the ambulance. I walked around the table and approached Katie, who was now on her knees looking at Mark. I squatted down next to her. I removed my wedding ring and cast it into the pile of broken glass next to Mark's head. "Catherine, I believe I no longer require this item. If you wish, you may retrieve it from the glass." Katie, with tears in her eyes, asked, "Cards? What are these additional cards? On your marriage for a cheater? What are you kidding me, Mark?" UAA informed them that the ambulance should arrive imminently and would notify them of its arrival. I exited the premises via the front door, entered my vehicle, and proceeded to drive away. 2 blocks later, I encountered an ambulance that was moving at a slow pace and appeared to be searching for house numbers with a spotlight. I continued my journey and returned home. Upon entering the house, I began to pack my belongings, anticipating the arrival of law enforcement. I was expecting his arrival at any moment. I gathered a small suitcase and a couple of duffel bags and began to pack items I would require over the following few days. As I was zipping up my suitcase, I heard the front door open and Katie calling out to me. She asked me twice, "Henry, where are you?" I ignored her. I then proceeded to leave the bedroom with 2 duffel bags and a suitcase. "Oh, here you are, Henry. What are you doing, Henry? You don't have to go anywhere. God knows. You could at least tell me where you're going." "Mark. How about Larry and Brian? Or do you draw the line at married guys? You actually knelt down instead of paying in cash. By the way, how much was the bid?" "Henry, stop it. Mark was the only one I was going to do this for. No matter what. The extent of my involvement with this individual was significant, given the size of the financial transaction. I did not intend to engage in sexual intercourse with him. Moreover, you prevented me from doing so. Did I prevent you? You have already initiated physical intimacy. I have already stated that I am indifferent to the matter. I believe that they should be held accountable. Should I simply inform the authorities of my actions? No, it would be unwise to do so. We will simply be held accountable for the damages incurred. I refuse to cooperate with the authorities. When is your next poker night? It is in 2 weeks. Mark will not be invited back, so there is no need to worry. 2 weeks will be sufficient for us to process what has transpired. Upon completion of her sentence, I exited the premises and proceeded to my vehicle. She was already at the entrance, vocalizing a message to me. I disregarded her and departed. I drove a few miles, located a motel, and secured accommodations for the night. I deactivated my mobile device and gazed at the ceiling for the remainder of the night. I eventually succumbed to slumber at approximately 5 a.m. I awoke at 12 a.m. and slept until 10 a.m. At 10 a.m., I arose, bathed, and proceeded to the front desk to settle my bill, which I paid in full until Wednesday. I then reactivated my phone and discovered a multitude of unanswered calls from Katie and Allison, along with several messages from Katie herself. These messages attempted to justify her actions, claiming that it was merely a bet and that she regretted the outcome. I responded to her with a single text, in which I suggested that all her messages be forwarded to her mother and that she be asked to assess the situation. I then turned off the phone again. I spent the next 2 hours sitting on a park bench, an additional hour walking around the mall, and then another hour sitting on another park bench. I then went to the supermarket and purchased a variety of junk food items. I returned to my motel room and spent the remainder of the night consuming unhealthy food and researching various scams on the internet. On Monday morning, I was completely exhausted and fell asleep. I went to work and attempted to be productive. My supervisor once observed me staring into space and finally inquired about the source of my distress. When I informed him that I was dealing with significant family issues, he recommended that I take at least a few days off. He instructed me to contact him on Wednesday and let him know if I required additional time off. By this time, it was already time to conclude the workday. I proceeded to leave and planned to stop by a local bar and grill for a couple of beers and a meal of superior quality to the one I had purchased at the supermarket. I was not inclined to engage in conversation, so I went to the back of the restaurant and took a booth, regardless of my preferences. Suddenly, 2 figures appeared next to me. Neither of the individuals in question was the waitress. "Henry, might I inquire as to whether you object to Alice and I occupying the same space?" I ignored them and took a sip of ice water. "Might I inquire as to whether you are also displeased with us?" "We have done nothing wrong." Mary and Allison sat on the other side of the booth, and Allison spoke next. "Henry, if Mary and I did nothing wrong, why are you angry with us? I am aware that you do not particularly enjoy playing poker with Katie, yet I had assumed that we were on friendly terms. Similarly, I had assumed that we were on friendly terms, but you have not done anything to indicate otherwise. Are you seriously asking me this question?" I replied as sharply as I could without raising my voice. "I was held by your husband so that my wife could engage in sexual intercourse with another man without my interference." We remained silent for what seemed like an eternity. I was under the impression that we were friends at one point, but that was before she actually started. I looked around and pleaded for assistance in resolving this situation. However, you two remained silent. I did not anticipate that she would actually carry out her threat. Mary suggested that I had misinterpreted the situation, that it was merely a joke. I was incredulous that she had actually followed through with her plan. Allison stated that she regretted her actions and feared that you would continue sending these messages. To her mother, she replied that she would not yet do so, but that she would if necessary. They discussed the situation after the ambulance took Mark away. Larry and Sandy said that they would not call the police, she would simply have to pay. Mary listened attentively and responded, "I will not pay anyone anything." I understand that Larry and Sandy were instrumental in alleviating what had apparently become a gambling problem for Katie is now the subject of scrutiny. While I do not blame them for her weakness, Sandy stood by and observed, and Larry was instrumental in preventing Katie from ruining our marriage so that she would not be expelled from the poker group. "Henry, she is merely a wreck. Please try to forgive her," Mary implored. "I am uncertain if she desires forgiveness, as she believes she did not do anything wrong. I believe there may be an issue. It seems that she desires an apology from me for preventing her from fulfilling her wager." Allison appeared to have a sudden realization. "What if we achieve equilibrium? What if you seek out a partner who will fulfill your needs?" I responded to her in a slow and deliberate manner, as if I were speaking to a child. Consider this: we were in a room, presumably with our significant other. Then, those same friends held me. She then returned to settle the bet, which would balance the scales. I must find a woman who will provide me with pleasure. I essentially subjected myself to public humiliation in front of her friends, who merely heard that I had gotten even. The image of her on her knees remains vivid in my mind. Conversely, she may not believe me when I say that I have gotten even. She may simply pretend that I did not do it. I cannot allow that to happen. I implore you to consider this: there must be a way to conclude this situation. It is distressing to witness my friend enduring such anguish. Mary, you do not wish to see me in pain, yet were you indifferent to the pain I endured on Saturday? You remained passive while these events transpired. I was in distress, yet you did not acknowledge my suffering. Friends do not behave in this manner. In my view, these two individuals were as culpable as anyone else. I was devising a plan for retribution. I have devised a plan for a little payback. I am convinced that if someone had said something, this would not have happened. You could have spoken to your husband, it might have caused a fight, but it might have saved my marriage. It is time to give them some hope. I am unsure if there is a way to balance the scales, as you say. I am not necessarily against the idea. I am unable to discern how, if one of us were to act in such a manner, it would affect the equilibrium of the situation. I observed Allison for approximately 10 seconds. What if both of you were to do so? You wish for us to achieve equilibrium, Mary inquired. Paul will undoubtedly be enraged if he discovers this, I replied sarcastically. I am the man who held me while my wife was unfaithful to me. I understand the situation fully. I will do it, Allison stated. We both looked at her. Mary regarded her with astonishment. You are correct, it is partially our responsibility. I am unable to perform this task, she stated. It is unfair of you to place me in this position, Henry replied. If Allison is willing to assist, that should be sufficient. The hook has been installed. The remaining step is to reel in the fish. Both of you are insignificant. This is part of the negotiations. I do not seek balance, I require the scales to tip in my favor. Mary sat there for approximately 2 minutes, during which time she reflected on the situation. The longer she did this, the more convinced she became that she could handle it. If we proceed with this plan of action, will you forgive Katie? If you do not proceed with this plan of action, I will not even consider forgiving her. You will not tell Paul about this. I will not say a word to him. In fact, I was not going to tell him this in person until Wednesday morning. I have a motel room until then. To postpone a decision until the weekend and then determine whether to return home or find an alternative residence. I am astonished at this turn of events. Mary replied, welcome to my world. I retorted, if you find this so disagreeable, simply disregard it. That is not the issue at hand. Henry, I hold you in high regard and consider you a decent individual. Had I not been married, I would undoubtedly be in a relationship with you. However, I am married, and your actions are I am not forcing you to do anything. I am aware that your intention is to cheat on your husband. If you believe that doing so will help you to move on from your husband's actions, then I am willing to facilitate that. However, I must stress that the responsibility for this situation lies with your husband. Had he not behaved in the way that he did, I would not be in this situation. With regard to the other woman, she could have explained the situation in any way she wished. However, I was motivated to seek retribution against her husband. Therefore, I was not concerned about the way in which she presented the facts. I will meet you tomorrow evening in my room at 6 o'clock. 00 I'll bring something to eat and some wine. Both women got up from the table and walked away, talking to each other. They appeared excited about tomorrow night and did not seem upset. Am I the only one who takes marriage vows seriously? I am aware of the assumption that I am a married man who is planning to date 2 married women. While discussing the sanctity of marriage, it is important to note that the woman in question has violated the sacred bond between 2 individuals by engaging in deceitful and humiliating actions. She has effectively annulled the marriage, rendering the vows null and void. Obedience to the vows is no longer a requirement, and the dissolution of the marriage is imminent. However, the women and their husbands bear partial responsibility for the situation. I have no patience for those who believe that the sanctity of marriage is absolute, yet are willing to condone infidelity. My personal philosophy is that if you don't want your spouse to cheat, you shouldn't cheat yourself. I understand that my former partner did not intend to cheat on me, but it was not difficult for her to accept the decision to pursue this course of action when the poker group was a valuable resource for me, and I was willing to risk losing that asset to ensure that my wife received the help she needed with her gambling problem. However, it seemed that she was not willing to seek help until she reached rock bottom. It is possible that divorce could serve as a catalyst for her to reach that point. On Tuesday, I returned to my homeland, ensuring that my wife was not present, and went to retrieve some items. The relocation to a new residence proved challenging, as it entailed navigating through a space that had become a repository of memories and experiences. Each time I encountered a sentimental item, I found myself grappling with the reality that these objects would no longer be a part of my life. Consequently, I made the decision to remove any items that might evoke memories of her, including my electronics, laptop, iPad, camera, basic tools, and clothes. After completing this process, I began searching for an apartment to rent. I identified an affordable, furnished one-bedroom option and proceeded to finalize the lease. I was able to rent the property on a month-by-month basis. I was free to move in at any time after Saturday. After signing the rental agreement, I went to lunch and prepared to meet the other women. I went to Best Buy and purchased an Apple SD card reader and a dozen SD cards. I also purchased the least expensive color printer, which printed wirelessly. I then went to I procured a couple bottles of wine that I knew Mary and Allison liked from a nearby liquor store. I then returned to the motel room and arranged my belongings in a manner that appeared disorganized. I set up the 35mm camera in a position that afforded a clear view of the beds, as the room's cluttered appearance made the camera difficult to see at 5 p.m. I ordered a selection of appetizers from a local restaurant, and they were delivered precisely at 6 o'clock. At 1500 hours, I heard a soft knock on the door. I looked through the peephole to ascertain the gender of the visitors, ruling out the possibility of an angry husband. I was not afraid of my husband, I simply wished to avoid being caught off guard again. I proceeded to the door and activated the camera to record video. I invited the visitors into the room and offered them wine. They initially declined, but subsequently decided that a modest amount of alcohol might facilitate their participation. They expressed reservations about the proposed plan, suggesting that they could simply consume wine and engage in conversation. They both acknowledged that they would never be compelled to do anything against their will. They referenced Henry Allison's assertion that they were both agreeable individuals and expressed regret that Brian did not possess similar qualities. Mary, you were indeed correct in your assessment. We did indeed fail you when we remained silent and took no action. Our inaction was, in fact, an action. I am truly sorry for this failure on our part. We appreciate your forgiveness, but I would still like to understand what I did wrong. Mary, it is difficult to accept that Katie made such a decision without prior consideration. Had she wished to proceed with me, she should have done so when I was absent. I would appreciate an explanation of what I did to cause her to believe she could act in this manner. Henry, I am convinced that no such incident has occurred previously. It is my understanding that this is a unique occurrence. It is unfeasible to maintain secrecy in this instance, as the information is liable to be divulged. It is inevitable that this information will become known. She was unaware of the veracity of this assertion. Allison commenced, despite the risk of appearing too hasty. I will proceed first and approach the bed. I did as she instructed, and she took her position in front of me. I will now disrobe you. You must remain stationary with your hands at your sides. Required to perform this action herself, Mary sat in the office chair adjacent to the desk and smiled widely. This prompted me to consider whether these two individuals had previously engaged in a similar act. Mary was situated in an optimal position to capture our actions on video. Allison proceeded to unbutton my shirt and pull it down, positioning my arms in the sleeves and extending them outward at my sides. Shiran then proceeded to place her hands on my chest, smiling widely. She proceeded to untie my shoes and instruct me to lift my feet one by one to remove them. She then removed my socks. She then proceeded to unbuckle my belt, unbutton my jeans, and pull them over my hips. After I had removed my jeans, she knelt in front of me. I found myself wanting to accelerate the process. I resisted the urge to speed up the process and instead allowed her to continue. It was truly remarkable. Brian was fortunate that the experience did not take an excessive amount of time. When she realized that I was completely finished, she sat on her knees and looked at me. I leaned over and kissed her gently on the forehead. Allison's performance was nothing short of incredible. I will need a few minutes to recharge. We sat down and consumed some of the food we had brought with us, as well as additional wine. We engaged in further discussion regarding the events that transpired subsequent to my departure from Larry and Sandy on the previous Saturday night. Allison initiated the narrative. Initially, Mark was confronted by Katie, who accused him of cheating. Due to the multitude of falling glass items, he was rendered unable to speak. He was concerned that the glass on his hands might become embedded in his broken nose or mouth. Mary then took her turn. His expression when the ambulance arrived, which took a few minutes longer than it should have, was noteworthy. His hands were removed from his face. He appeared to be. It was a rather unfortunate turn of events. "I believe I will proceed to meet the ambulance," Allison stated with a smile and a voice that imitated mine. "I must have forgotten," I replied. Unfortunately, he still survived. Mary shuddered once more. He proceeded to inform everyone that he did not cheat and that Katie owes him a bet. "He's going to defeat you. You should have observed the scene. Blood was everywhere. The ambulance personnel did not even attempt to remove him, they merely covered him and transported him away." Mary took the initiative. Katie stated that she would never pay their wager unless he could prove that I interjected, and thus, if Mark can prove that he did not cheat, the girls will still be required to pay. There was a significant pause, and then Mary spoke again. "I am fairly certain that there is no need to worry about anything occurring at the present moment." "Are you absolutely certain, Em?" "As I have already stated, Mark sustained hundreds of cuts, all of which the majority of the lacerations were minor, requiring only sutures. However, 2 significant incisions on his abdomen necessitated surgical intervention. He remained in the hospital until Monday, when the remaining glass fragments were removed. Larry visited him, and Allison spoke with him. He was visibly enraged and threatened to kick your ass. Subsequently, he not only requested a bet from Katie but also engaged in sexual intercourse with her in your presence." Mary once again intervened. "It seems unlikely that Mark will be permitted to return, given that he was caught cheating. However, Larry is also displeased with you. He believes you will be required to pay for the curio cabinet, and he is upset because his homeowner's insurance will not cover the cost. He also demands compensation for the hospital bill and the damaged items in the closet. Mary, kindly convey my message to Larry and Sandy. I am willing to pay a nominal fee of 10 cents if the judge orders me to do so. However, there will be court documents and statements to substantiate this claim. My statement would be as follows. If I were to discover a full-blown orgy was taking place, I would be forced to take legal action. An orgy was in progress, and when I attempted to prevent my wife from participating, I was restrained by Larry, Brian, and Paul. My statement will include the names of all participants and everyone present. I will ensure that all neighbors receive copies, as well as the neighbors of everyone who was there. I will also ensure that family members, friends, and colleagues receive copies. Additionally, I will provide copies to every church attended by relevant individuals. If feasible, I will contact Oprah to disseminate information about the incident." We remained silent for approximately 30 seconds when Mary suddenly spoke up. "It is now my turn. Let us proceed. I would prefer that you both be naked. We are not required to be naked for this activity." Allison laughed. "I am aware that you do not require nudity, but I feel somewhat self-conscious. We have already gone this far. What difference does it make?" She proceeded to disrobe, and Allison followed her example. I once again assumed a position at the edge of the bed. This time, it was Mary who assumed a kneeling position. She did not delay. I attempted to distract myself from the unfolding events, attempting to prolong the process. Allison stood from her seated position and pushed me back onto the bed, leaving Mary in a kneeling position. I ended up landing on my back with my knees on the bed. After approximately 5 minutes, I sensed that the encounter was nearing its conclusion. Mary then interjected, stating that it should have been her turn. Allison, in response, rolled over to join me, prompting Allison to laugh and roll to the side. Mary then assumed her position on the bed. Eventually, she rolled off. She then assumed a supine position adjacent to me. I inquired as to whether she had previously engaged in this activity. We had experienced a few instances of this nature. We had attended the same institution of higher learning. She confirmed this, adding that they had engaged in this activity on 1 or 2 occasions. Mary then laughed, and Allison joined in. They laughed approximately 100 times. Mary then stated that it had been enjoyable, but that she had to depart. I hope this will be beneficial for you. Please contact me tomorrow and let me know your thoughts. I really hope you two can make it through this. I don't want to lose you as friends. Allison looked at me and said, Henry, we are very sorry that we didn't say anything when everything was happening. Please contact me tomorrow so we can talk. If you want to talk later, call me anytime. Just so we are clear, this was probably the only way. Probably Mary asked, Come on Mary, that's all that's been talked about since last night. It is likely that you will engage in this activity again. In order to avoid any further incidents, we must exercise greater caution than we have done previously. For example, we should avoid performing these acts in front of other people while playing poker. I acknowledged this with a laugh. We will discuss this further tomorrow. At that point, the two women left, and I began working on the video I had created. I edited it down to the most sexually explicit parts and printed out several still images that were highly compromising of both women. Then, I transferred the edited video to the remaining SD cards and made 9 identical envelopes. Each envelope contained an SD card and several images of a highly explicit nature. Photographs of the two women were included, although it would have been apparent to anyone who was acquainted with us that the images were of a compromising nature. The photographs and video footage were edited to remove any identifying features and to obscure my face. I retired for the night and was asleep almost immediately. On Wednesday morning, I awoke and turned on my mobile phone, only to discover that I had received a further dozen calls and messages from Katie. I did not listen to or read them, but I did not delete them. I then contacted my superior and informed him that I would be taking the remainder of the week off. I returned home after Katie had left for work and packed away a number of my belongings. During the lunch break, I proceeded to gather together the tools and personal items that I had brought with me. I then received another call from Katie. This time, I answered the call with a brief, "What?" This caught her off guard, and it took her a few seconds to realize that I had actually answered the phone. "Oh my God, Henry, don't hang up. Where are you, Henry? We need to talk. We can get through this, please. Talk to me. Where did you stop? Please come home so we can work on ending this. Please." At that moment, I interrupted her. The time was 12 a.m. I request that only those who were present with Larry and Sandy be in attendance, with the exception of your boyfriend. Should I encounter him at the gathering, I will again assert my authority by asserting my intention to physically remove him from the premises. Furthermore, I must reiterate that he is not currently in a position to engage in social activities, as you have indicated. The gathering is scheduled to commence at 6 p.m. on Saturday. This is not a social gathering, it is an opportunity for you and your friends to present your case for why I should not divorce you. I have not listened to your messages, so be prepared for what you have to say. Please inform your friends that I will not be able to attend if they are late. Henry, I implore you not to ruin our marriage over a trivial matter. When is the next poker night? I'm not sure. Perhaps a few more weeks. You are not obliged to attend if you do not wish to see me on Saturday. Henry, I love you. Please come home. I will see you on Saturday. She was unable to comprehend that the root of the problem was my overreaction. She was aware of her obligation but failed to grasp the larger context. She was unaware that she was experiencing a problem. She was more concerned with honoring the poker bet than with upholding her marital vows. She has not yet reached a point of significant distress. The remainder of the week passed without incident. I purchased items for my apartment, including those for the bathroom, kitchen, and bedroom. I also purchased more items than I had anticipated. I stayed at a motel for the night. I spent my nights researching divorce. We did not have children. We could sell the house and receive $155,000. After the sale, we had minimal debt. Our income was approximately equal. This should be relatively straightforward. On Saturday afternoon, I sent Katie a message requesting that she text me when everyone was present. I was reluctant to remain in silence, awaiting the arrival of others or to have to revisit previous discussions if someone was late. At 4:55 p.m., she sent me a message indicating that all parties were already in attendance and waiting in the dining room at 5 p.m. At 5:50, I proceeded to ring the doorbell of my residence. As the designated host, I was responsible for welcoming our guests. Katie, however, opened the door, stating, "Honey, this is your house. You don't need to ring the doorbell." Upon entering the dining room, I was carrying a small duffel bag filled with envelopes. It is noteworthy that all the furniture in our dining room was provided by our host. The table, prepared by Grandma Katie, was quite large for a party of 10, with 4 chairs on each side and 1 on each end. Upon entering the dining room, I observed that there were 3 empty seats adjacent to me. Larry was situated at the far right, with Sandy occupying the seat to his left. The remaining 3 seats to Sandy's left remained unoccupied. In a right-facing configuration, Paul, Brian, Mary, and Allison were seated. At the head of the table, Terry was seated. Katie proceeded to walk past me and take a seat in the middle of the 3 empty seats, presumably with the intention of encouraging me to sit next to her. I proceeded to the left end of the table where Terry was seated and informed her that I would be taking my place. "You can sit next to Katie. Let's place a bet on BJ that I'll sit here. It might lead to something." Katie proceeded to record the conversation on her phone. She initiated the recording process on her iPhone and positioned the device on the table. I proceeded to take a seat and survey the scene after a moment of silence. I then stated, "It is evident that our purpose here is to discuss the potential dissolution of Catherine's marriage. If anyone has any objections, I would appreciate hearing them." "I suggest that we begin," Terry interjected. "Henry, It would be inaccurate to suggest that I am the most appropriate person to ask for advice on this matter. My wife was unfaithful, and the subsequent divorce was a direct result of this infidelity. I am genuinely sorry that this has occurred. It is clear that Terry was not adequately prepared for this meeting. I appreciate your honesty, Terry. I anticipate that I may have further questions at a later stage." I surveyed the individuals present at the table. "Larry, what is your opinion?" "It is not a problem for me. She loves you and she is beautiful. Do you think she was a holy virgin when you met her?" I answered, "But I expected her to become a saint after we met." "Would you mind if Sandy pleasured other guys?" Larry was silent, and Sandy fidgeted in her seat. In a jocular manner, I inquired as to the duration of their open infidelity. Sandy blushed, and all eyes were fixed upon her except Larry's. Larry regarded me with a piercing gaze, yet he did not refute the accusation. Katie abruptly revealed the truth to Sandy, who was taken aback. I informed them that we had only engaged in this activity on 3 occasions. While I am not pleased with this arrangement, Larry believes we should continue. However, I am opposed to this course of action. I dislike this situation. I then suggested to Sandy that she speak with Catherine about this matter at a later time. She is not required to take any action, nor is she obliged to do so if she does not wish to. I reminded Larry of our previous conversation, in which I advised him that he should end his relationship with Katie. He should not engage in any further poker games with her. She should have terminated the relationship long ago. He has caused her significant distress. The financial loss incurred as a result of the altercation in my residence, which was instigated by your wife's decision to settle the bet, may be considered equivalent to the sum of $10,000. In light of this, I am compelled to question the rationale behind your continued presence in this house. I would like to reiterate that the items in question were gifted to your friend Catherine by her grandmother. Their significance to me is minimal. Paul Bryan, would any of you be willing to reconsider your stance? Paul began, "I think it's safe to say that none of us want to see our friends go through the pain and anguish of a divorce. We've been friends for 4 years, I have maintained a distance from him." "Paul, you are not friends with us. You are friends with Catherine, and I am her husband. However, you are friends with my wife." He said. I concurred, and then she stood there silently while you 3 held me down and my wife knelt in front of the other man. However, Mary did not intervene. It was us who took action. I glanced at Mary and Allison, who were looking at the table. I do not believe this conversation unfolded as they anticipated. "Paul, you walk into a bar and see Your friend Brian's wife is in the far corner on her knees in front of another man. What are you doing? Are you calling Brian and hoping he makes it on time? Are you getting between them to prevent her from doing anything? Well, how about you go to the bar and see Brian in the far corner? What are you doing? Are you calling Allison? I already know the answer to all these questions. If it's Brian's wife on her knees, you step in and get her out of there and tell Brian. If Brian is going to purchase a Hummer, it would be prudent to observe the situation and perhaps participate. It is unlikely that Allison will become aware of your involvement, given that Brian is your friend and Allison is your friend's wife. However, if Brian were to become involved, it would be more challenging to maintain your silence. The issue is that Katie is your friend, whereas I am not. If Katie were to confront me, you would likely not intervene because I am your friend's husband, not your friend. Had I not entered the room, none of you would have spoken up. One might reasonably conclude that the breach of trust had occurred. In the future, I will be the one to make a bet with her. I looked at Katie. When did you stop respecting me? Never, she replied. I respect you more than any other person I've ever known. When did I first tell you that this was normal? I never said so, she answered meekly. How many times did this happen before last week? Never. Why are you so shocked by this question? Why should I trust you? If I hadn't seen it happen, would you? I was informed that I should wait until we arrived home and inquire as to whether anything unusual occurred during the card game that evening. However, I believe that the crux of the issue lies in the fact that you were willing to jeopardize your marriage, yet reluctant to risk your esteemed position in the poker group. I am struggling to comprehend this discrepancy. I turned to Brian and Paul, who were aware that Katie placed a higher value on her standing in poker than on her marriage. Instead of offering guidance and support, you encouraged her to continue down this path. I then directed my attention to Brian and Paul and posed the question as to how they would react if they were to witness their wives engaging in sexual intercourse with another man. They responded with a grin and a look of shared understanding before turning to me and asking whether I would be compensated for my participation. Paul then posed the question as to whether Mary was also willing to engage in such an act. Brian, for his part, decided to contribute his own comment, which was something along the lines of, "Well." I inquired as to whether she had acquired any new knowledge. I simply smiled, so I am uncertain as to when the next poker game will take place. The two men muttered something to each other for a considerable length of time. Then Brian inquired as to whether I wished to attend. I replied in the negative, stating that I was unsure why Catherine had just stated that she would not be attending again, yet she persists in inquiring about the next scheduled event. I have reached my limit. I took my gym bag and retrieved the envelopes. I intended to facilitate the dissolution of a couple of marriages that evening, but I am of the opinion that the outcome is already predetermined. I replaced the envelopes in the bag and returned it to Catherine. You have inflicted significant emotional distress upon me and have even requested that your associates hold me accountable. While you did so with apparent indifference to the wrongfulness of your actions, you not only engaged in infidelity but also subjected me to public humiliation without a second thought. Your place in the poker group is evidently more important to you than I am. Most distressing of all is that these people are not your friends. True friends would never do this to. Catherine began to intervene, stating, "No, no, no, darling. You are the most. Calm down, Catherine. It is now my turn. You did not apologize for your actions. Instead, you attempted to persuade me to accept your rationale for your actions. You repeatedly asserted that we had to get through this, yet, despite the evidence presented, you have not acknowledged any wrongdoing. Even after all the circumstances that have transpired, you still intend to continue attending poker nights. If you are willing to engage in sexual favors while I am present, what other forms of gambling are you willing to engage in when I am not? Are you prepared to become a single parent to someone else's child simply because you lost a bet? If you become pregnant as a result of my actions, our relationship is over. You have a gambling problem and require professional assistance. I will consult with a lawyer on Monday if you wish to retain legal counsel. You are free to possess any item you desire, including your misguided companions." Brian stated that he would do so. Brian Allison also made a surprising assertion regarding everything he said. Indeed, it is evident that the individuals in question are deriding the marriage of Brian to Katie for their own entertainment. Brian was on the verge of rejecting their claims by stating, "I had sexual intercourse with him, and I am uncertain as to why he did not." It is notable that Henry was privy to this information and yet did not divulge it. Henry then inquired, "Will you take me with you?" This was followed by another prolonged silence of approximately 10 seconds. Mary spoke, "You know what? Paul, ask her. I'm tired of being the only one responsible in this relationship." The couple's physical contact, such as touching or holding hands, was a source of considerable frustration for Mary. She continued, "Last Saturday, when the incident occurred, I was just as shocked as you were. I genuinely believed it was a prank because I was aware of how much she cared for you. I'm truly sorry I didn't speak up then, but perhaps it would be preferable for you to discover this information at this time, before you have children. Would you be so kind as to provide me with a lift as well?" We departed the house with Katie in a state of uncontrollable sobbing. Larry and Sandy engaged in a heated discussion regarding the swing, and Paul and his wife, who informed them that if they did not return home that day, they would not return at all. Both girls subsequently departed with their middle fingers extended. I accompanied Allison and Mary to Allison's parents' residence and subsequently returned to my motel. I consumed the remaining alcohol and food items. I eventually lost consciousness at approximately midnight. The separation from her was relatively straightforward. She relocated the furniture to storage. I obtained all of the items I desired from the residence, which was somewhat unexpectedly not of a considerable size. Allison and Mary separated from their respective spouses, and the three of us maintained a friendship with benefits. I have not received any communication from Katie, which was somewhat disappointing. I had anticipated that she would engage in a more strenuous effort and potentially attempt to compel counseling. Indeed, the marriage was never a significant priority for her. I never truly established a romantic connection with either Mary or Allison, yet the three of us developed a strong bond a year after the infamous financial dispute. I was present at the bar Wekia, and I had traditionally celebrated special occasions when the divorce was finalized 4 months ago. I sat, feeling sorry for myself and missing KTI, sipping my beer and staring at the wall. I felt a presence behind me and continued to stare at the wall, hoping that it would go away. I was disinclined to engage in conversation and hoped that he would simply leave if I did not react. "Is this seat taken?" I asked, lowering my voice. I gazed into my beer, contemplating my situation. "No, please sit down. You seem like a nice guy, so I'm surprised you're here alone. I usually have 2 wonderful friends with me, but they are on a double date. I also thought I had wonderful friends, but it turns out they weren't so amazing after all. I encountered a couple of women who informed me that there would be a handsome, solitary gentleman with a benevolent disposition seated alone in this establishment. I resolved to visit the bar and introduce myself. I introduced myself as Katie and responded to their greeting with a chuckle. I then proceeded to engage in conversation with the man, whom I later learned was named Henry. I inquired about his presence in the bar and he replied that he was not celebrating anything in particular. There is no cause for celebration. I am a failure in relationships. I was unable to prevent my wife from cheating, so I divorced her. My 2 closest friends are now in relationships with other men. I am perhaps also a failure. I had the best boyfriend in the world, who loved me with all his heart. I hurt him deeply. I was unfaithful to him and he divorced me. Was this the right decision for him or for me? Let us first consider his perspective. I am uncertain, but I believe you will have to ask him directly. Those I have spoken with say that he is unhappy. Honestly, what about you? The divorce was a very difficult period in my life. I conducted an in-depth examination of my own behavior and found it to be unsatisfactory. I sought counseling for substance abuse and have continued to do so since my husband observed these developments and attempted to alert me, but I was reluctant to believe him. In this context, it seems that divorce was an inevitable consequence of my addiction, which could potentially lead to the demise of my husband's relationship with me. I have never ceased to love you, Henry. However, I was unable to do so. I understand your perspective. It is encouraging to hear you refer to me as Katie or Kat, rather than Catherine. I have come here to elucidate my actions and reassure you that you are not responsible for my behavior. I am aware that you already recognize this, but I feel compelled to reiterate it. On the evening in question, I was compelled to inform you that on Saturday night, at the poker game, I was convinced that I was going to win the hand. When I did not win, I was taken aback but ultimately decided to pay the fee. I did not even consider it to be a sexual or cheating act, it was merely a handshake. I was afraid that I would be expelled from the group. I did not perceive it as I placed a bet on the stability of my marriage, as I had never anticipated your departure. I did not anticipate your anger, but I assumed that, in the end, you would forgive me because it was my duty. I assumed that you would understand that I must keep my word. In retrospect, I realized that I did not fully comprehend the gravity of the situation. It was an act of vile and disgusting behavior that I have never before perpetrated against another individual. At the time, I was unable to comprehend your irrational response. When I initiated the consultation, the doctor inquired about the circumstances surrounding the incident. After I detailed the events of the altercation and the subsequent demand that I document them in writing, the doctor expressed admiration for your intellect. After listening to my account, she stated she expressed surprise at the longevity of our marriage and provided an explanation for your repeated inquiries about the next poker night. She noted that there were no further poker nights and that you have not picked up a deck of cards since that night. She stated that you have not spoken to any of these individuals since that time. In the weeks following the incident, how is Sandy faring? She is coping reasonably well, and she and Larry have also divorced. It transpired that he was a cruel individual and she was similarly inclined towards cruelty. She was too embarrassed to voice her concerns, but eventually she decided to leave him. She is currently dating a colleague, Henry. I was mistaken in prioritizing the poker group over everything else. I loved you with all my heart and believed that you loved me in return. I therefore assumed that you would understand and be okay with it if these people were truly my friends. They would never have allowed things to progress to this point. I was unable to resist my desire to be part of this group. I allowed Mark to do what he did because I was desperate to remain involved. I am ashamed of my actions. Had you not intervened, I fear the consequences of my actions would have been far more severe. I am sorry for the pain and suffering I have caused you. I wish you well in all future endeavors. I would like to be friends with you, but I understand if you do not wish to reconcile. Before she began to weep, she requested that I call her Katie. She then rose from her seat and proceeded to walk towards the door. Hey Kat, she said, pausing but not turning around. Yes, Henry. Have you already had dinner? I observed her shoulders trembling with tears. No, Henry. Not yet, she replied, without turning around. I then stood up and approached her, placing my arm around her shoulders. I guided her to a seated position at my side and proceeded to escort her to the door. Let's go have a proper dinner, I suggested. We resumed our romantic relationship, and a few months later, we relocated to a shared residence. 9 months later, we renewed our vows in a ceremony conducted by a justice of the peace on the anniversary of our previous wedding. We determined that it would be more convenient to utilize the same date. As previously indicated, Katie remained consistent in her commitment to abstaining from gambling. She refrained from placing any wagers, even in a jocular manner. Some might assert that individuals who have engaged in infidelity are prone to repeat such actions. However, I do not subscribe to this perspective in regard to Katie. I believe her addiction led her to engage in behaviors that were not typical of her. I examined the underlying intention behind her actions. Her actions were not motivated by a desire to humiliate me or to seek a romantic partner. She instead sought to exploit my addiction. The remaining members of the band are still on amicable terms with each other, with the exception of Terry. They have openly discussed their decision to leave their wives. I have not heard from Mark since the incident. It seems he was not interested in discussing the matter further. The last I heard, he had left town. Kathy and I remain on amicable terms with Sandy Allison and Mary Sandy, who also terminated their participation in poker. They have become godmothers to our children. If you wish to avoid infidelity on the part of your partner, subscribe to our channel. The following story is of a more salacious nature than the previous one. If you are under the age of 18, do not read further.